Hello everyone, welcome to the Sweeney Show, Business Law Podcast. My name is David Sweeney and joining me here today is Brendan McDonald. Brendan, you're very welcome.
Thanks very much, glad to be here.
So Brendan is a qualified solicitor in former life. I know you've moved on and we'd love to get to know and discuss your current career path, but also a fine footballer in his day of the McDonald's dynasty down in Laois.
Not sure about that piece, but I'll give you the first piece.
We actually shared a football pitch back in the day, Black and Black Hall. That's a good few years ago.
A good few years ago now, is right, yeah. You were more adept than myself, I have to say.
No, they were good days, a bit of crack. So how are you? We went to Black Hall together, that's how we know each other. Going back, we're both qualified now, maybe 12, around that 12, 13 years period. And so you
like
did
that,
the whole Black Hall traineeship. You did, I know you, I think I remember you actually did you sit all your 8 FE1s in one go or something crazy like that?
I did, yeah. Myself and my best mate, Sean, decided after coming back from a J1 in the US, having no job and no apprenticeship, we said, sure, look, we'll give it a go and we'll give it a bash. So we sat all 8 at the one time thinking it'd be a good idea, which turned out to be a horrendous idea, because obviously the time taken up with study is just horrendous. So I ended up getting 6 out of 8 on the first go, and to my, I suppose, consternation, but also delight, because we were very competitive. My friend Sean actually got all 8 out of 8. So I felt like the poor relation getting 6, but people tell me it was still a good achievement. So look, went and repeated the other 2 and went into an apprenticeship then in a firm in Newbridge, White Partners, and apprenticed there. And obviously we met in Blackhall, had a bit of fun along the way before it all went a bit crazy. And then obviously the crash hit in 2008. We were qualified, I suppose, 6-8 months at that stage. Yeah. And I suppose ended up every file that we had, I was in conveyancing mostly and a bit of district court and did a lot of employment law.
Was that a typical...
We had, like everyone else... Go ahead.
Sorry, was that a typical general practice? Was your training bits of everything?
Yeah, so we were, I suppose, one of the bigger law firms in Leinster at the time. There was about 42 in the office when I joined, which was quite large, provincial office, I suppose. And we did a lot of construction, a lot of, I suppose, buying and selling 3-bed, 4-bed semi-Ds and that kind of thing. So, but equally, there was a big litigation practice, a big employment law practice, and a lot of, I suppose, older legacy, more established clients around the Kildare area, which obviously was, a more affluent part of Leinster. So there was lots going on, very, very busy practice. And obviously then the crisis hit in 2008, which seems such a long time ago now. But, all our files, like most other people, turned from conveyancing files into, liquidations, examinerships, various different banking files, and lots of redundancies, dealing with a lot of that. And then we were building up a bit of I suppose, the litigation side of the house as well. And we won a tender for to do some council work for Kildare County Council, so the litter and traffic offences. So ended up prosecuting those with one of the solicitors for a while. And I suppose the practice kind of downsized a little bit over the coming years. And by 2012 then, I suppose, I would have been doing mostly employment law in the office, helping out then the district court, circuit court, and still doing a lot of dealing with a lot of the legacy issues.
And were you, when you did the parking contract, were you on your feet in district court?
Yeah, absolutely. We always, we did them ourselves without counsel. We usually instructed counsel if it was something very complicated for the district court appeal, it's the circuit court. But if the appeal was, I suppose, monetary only, we would do it ourselves in the main. But you're rattling through up to 150 of them in a day. It was a very, very busy court in Naas. And then we obviously went up to Kilkenny and down to Carlow for Castledermot, came into Carlow, and part of it in Athy as well. So it was a very, very busy little piece of business, which was great. But it was very good from the point of view of advocacy in the district court
Yeah.
and being on your feet
Yeah,
and just getting that kind of rapport going. And lots of interesting stories there. And you get the odd look from the judge when an 80-year-old would be rattling up towards the front of the court with a cane or with a walking aid, and the judge would give you a little look saying, really? So you have to take, I suppose, take instructions by eye contact with the instructor from the council. So lots of nice ones like that. But
sure.
Really liked prosecuting people who parked in disabled bays. That became a real bane of my existence. Really just awful to do that on people who, you know, would be disabled and trying to get out of a car and get into a wheelchair or whatnot. And also then I suppose the other one I really liked getting was when people did dumping of black rubbish sacks, you know, especially on scenic routes, and invariably they used to forget to take their bills out of them. So you'd find a little bill, or the warden would have found a bill and trace it right back to them, and we'd have great fun with the chain of evidence on those as well.
And so then did you stay in that office in Newbridge, was it 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, so I was actually in the office in Newbridge for, I think it was 2 years all told, to the middle of 2012. And I suppose I was looking for something different at that stage. And I was toying with the idea of doing what you did, which is set up your own practice.
Oh, no, don't do it. It was a good decision not doing that.
I didn't have the, what would I say, so it would be non-controversial.
Insane.
The guts to do it. So I nearly had it. I had an office ready to go, and I suppose I was looking around for other jobs at the time, and a job came up in IDA, which I thought would be interesting in their commercial property division up in Athlone. And I ended up interviewing for it and getting offered the job. So myself and another colleague, they actually hired 2 solicitors. I suppose they reintroduced legal back into our property division, and they wanted qualified solicitors to do that. And I suppose bring it back in-house too, because even though it was in the middle of a crisis, the multinational sector were flat out still purchasing lands and expanding their properties. And, you know, with the amount of business parks that IDA Ireland has around the country, there's a huge amount of legal work going on, from everything from easements to rights of way, to building out various different ductings for the service providers to come in with broadband or with e-vehicles and these kind of things. So lots and lots going on. So I interviewed and was successful getting the job. So I actually decided to take the job because it was still 2012 at this stage and things weren't looking great. I said I'd go in-house for a few years and see how that was. So I joined IDA in, I think it was the 9th of July 2012, and ended up working in the legal department, commercial legal department, for 3.5 years there, until I was tapped on the shoulder. But that was a very, very busy legal department. And the great thing about it was that we were involved in some of the larger transactions that were happening in Ireland in 2012, 2013, 2014. So one of the first ones that I worked on would have been the Glanbia milk plant in Bellevue. So IDA have a business and technology park in Bellevue, South Kilkenny, just across the border from Waterford City. And Glanbia at the time were looking to build the biggest milk formula plant in Europe. So we ended up doing a lot of work with that. And the great thing about IDA is you actually, because you're the in-house solicitor, you get involved in the transaction as well. So it's not just the legal part, it's the due diligence part. You're brought in from the facilities point of view. You're asked your opinion on various different things. So you got to sit in on very different meetings, I suppose, than I would have been in selling 3-bed semi-Ds in Newbridge.
So just for the unknown, what exactly is the IDA?
Yeah, so the IDA is the government body that's charged with bringing foreign direct investment into Ireland. So we're set up under statute under the Industrial Development Acts, I think 1986 set us up. So the IDA and Enterprise Ireland were part of the one group until the mid-80s, and then we split to focus, I suppose, with Enterprise Ireland being our sister agency, focusing on Indigenous companies who build and grow and look to internationalise, whereas we're the other side of the coin, we look to bring companies into Ireland. So we have a network of offices and colleagues around the world so when I joined IDEA, there was about 270 people. There's now about, I think, 340. So we have a network of offices around the world who, with colleagues who are scouring the globe for the new companies that are setting up. So we'll say the born on the web companies. The guys in California would have got Facebook, Google, LinkedIn, and all those companies to come to Ireland. Equally, we're looking at, be it biopharma, be it Industry 4.0 and all that kind of good stuff. So they will try and convince a company to look at Ireland as a base for European operations or for a particular function. And then they will feed that back to our head office and colleagues in head office, depending on the division. So be it pharma division, financial services, medical technologies or whatnot. And they then feed that down to the regional offices, which is where I am now. So I suppose that's a good segue how I got into regional development. So in 2015, a colleague of mine said to me that there was a job going in Galway for business development. And he said to me, McDonald, you talk a lot. So I think you might be good for this role over in Galway. You might come over, see if you could interview for it. So it's all internal. So he convinced me to look at it. And I suppose my main problem at the time was, if I was to leave law, how would I get back in? Or, and I suppose I was assured that it was, if I did a year or two, I could come back into the legal department and got all those assurances. And I suppose in my head, I was kind of thinking it would be good to learn more about the business of IDA and the business of attracting in foreign direct investment into Ireland. So I interviewed for the job and ended up getting it and going over to Galway. And Galway, as you may know, has a thriving medical device sector. So there's about 11 people working med devices in Galway in various different companies such as Medtronic, Boston Scientific, and all those, so I suppose, huge multinationals. So I got very much a taste of the thriving ecosystem that is Galway. And then obviously when the companies come over, it was my job to bring them around and show them around. So we would pick them up at the hotel at 8 o'clock in the morning, have a breakfast meeting. We would have meetings with companies all day, to include then, I suppose, a dinner meeting in the evening. So long days, but very much worth it from the point of view of selling Ireland. And then we would ultimately convince them to set up a new entity in Galway, or with the existing companies, we'd be trying to get them to build and grow their teams and expand their teams. So that was very exciting. And I suppose after a year and a half of that, I was thinking, would I go back into law? And then the regional manager job came up in the Southeast. And I said I'd apply for that. So I was very lucky to get that. Yeah. And here I am 3.5 years into that role. So I suppose I'm 5 years out of legal now.
Yeah. So do you think that the skills and knowledge that you learned through your solicitor traineeship and solicitor experience, do you think they were transferable into your new role?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's funny the amount of times you use your legal knowledge, even when talking to companies. So when they're coming over, what they need to know is that we have a robust legal system in Ireland, and that we have a very ease of doing business system, if you like, in Ireland. We sell Ireland on that basis, that it is a common law jurisdiction. So from the perspective of the commonalities between, British law or Canadian law or US law, it's not too far removed from the point of view of compliance and regulatory environment. So that is very important for credibility from an Ireland Inc. perspective, because if you have a system of law, of compliance, of regulatory perspective, if you like, from a holistic perspective, that means that companies and their customers will have confidence in the products and services that they're building and offering in Ireland, because they know that they've gone through a robust system that has checks and balances and that will be accountable if something goes wrong. And that's a huge part of the multinationals and the products and services that they sell internationally, because their customers have to have the confidence, that the product is what it says on the tin. So that is a very attractive piece for Ireland Inc. when we're selling Ireland abroad. And then you'd be sitting in meetings and, they'd be asking maybe about the employment law scenario in Ireland and how easy it is to onboard or exit people. And we generally get into talking about, we generally give examples of the differences between Ireland and France, for example. So, anyone who's had experience working in the employment law sector or with employees or companies in France will know that it can be quite challenging sometimes to exit people. It can be challenging to even onboard people. So we do comparisons, country comparisons with different pieces of law that they need. Then from a business negotiation point of view, obviously my experience in property division and property legal is definitely of relevance in these, because every company that comes here has to have a business home. So they have to rent an office, or they have to, if they're building a new plant on a greenfield site, they have to buy the site, they have to go through the planning process. So we can get into talking about the purchase contracts, about the planning and regulatory environment around that, maybe about on board Planola, about setting out the lands from a legal perspective, about the lodgement of the planning system, that kind of good stuff. And then just general business advice. And I suppose you have credibility when you're sitting in these meetings, when you say that you're a lawyer and that you've worked in both private practice and in the in-house legal department in the environment that we're trying to sell. So that definitely helps me, I suppose, in meetings. And I suppose the critical thinking training that we would have from various different courses and different things we've been on, and our training in Black. And obviously as well, then our problem solving ability as lawyers to take an issue and dissect it and see what needs to be done from the point of view of helping the company ultimately get to their end goal of setting up a business entity here with functions that are going to obviously, ultimately make the company money and be successful and profitable for them.
And so when you talk about attracting foreign investment from other countries, what countries are you talking about? Do you have specific targets, and are there any specific industries that you like to attract into Ireland?
Well, I suppose there's 6 main pillars, or 5 or 6 main pillars that we look to. So there's the life sciences sector, which is medtech, pharma and biopharma. So that's a thriving industry at the moment, as we know. Then you have international financial services. You have our engineering division. You have our technology division, and then you have our consumer content division. So consumer content is your Facebooks, your Googles, LinkedIn, anything born on the web. Your technology division then is your HPs, your Apples. Obviously, Apple down the road from you in Cork is a huge thriving industry for Ireland. Your financial services, as I said, and then your engineering, which is now moving on from traditional manufacturing to manufacturing 4.0, Industry 4, and the next generation of smart warehousing, smart factories, and all that kind of good stuff. So we're divided into divisions internally in IDA, and then we also have a couple of divisions, formerly called New Forms of Investment, which is now our Clean Tech division, and another called our Emerging Business division, which are out in India, China, and then New Zealand and Australia. So we're divided into divisions, and we're divided into geographic locations. So depending on your division geographic location, you'll be specifically targeting companies within that region. So as I say, we've got a network of about, I think it's 19 offices now and consulates around the world, where we're scouring boardrooms and new companies that are coming up, looking at the venture capital, where that is going, who's being funded in various different locations, and targeting them then for when they're internationally expanding, and looking for HQs or looking to put a function into Europe. So obviously then the big selling point at the moment is that we are the largest English-speaking country in the EU as of Brexit, which is great. And as somebody said to me quite quickly after Brexit, somebody from Cork, that Cork is the second largest English-speaking city in Europe. So when you look at it like that, I suppose we can spin it whatever way we need to. So I suppose there's lots of work going on all the time. That's constant in the background.
Yeah. And that's it. So what are the main attractions for a business to come into Ireland? It's surely just not a tax incentive, is it?
No, and it's funny, everybody says to me, oh, are they coming here because of the tax? Tax is one small element of it, really, in the grander scheme of things, because at the end of the day, you can't have a brass plate entity anymore. You have to have substance behind the entity that's here. So that means that companies are coming here for talent.
So sorry, when you sorry,
talent.
Brendan, when you say brass plate, it means you can't just set up a registered company here and do your business elsewhere. You actually have to come in now and conduct business here.
Exactly. Yeah. So you have to conduct business, and it has to be a meat and veg operation, as the lad says.
Yeah.
So you have companies who come here basically. Okay, they're looking at the tax piece, but we never speak about the tax piece when they get here because they've already looked into that, or they wouldn't be looking at Ireland. From the point of view of what they need to do here, then a company can only be successful if it gets the people to do the jobs or the functions that they have in mind to set up here. So the talent piece is probably the number one piece that we will have to deal with any company inquiry that comes in. So where can they get the people? How can they hire them? How can they onboard them? And what skill sets do they have? So from that point of view, we would liaise very heavily with third level institutions right around the country. So the ITs and the universities as to the graduate output. And actually, my next meeting today is with an industry board in Waterford IT who are liaising with industry as to the curriculum that they have on board at the moment, and to see how they need to tweak that for industry needs, and I suppose what they need to see in their graduates. So that's going on in various different locations around the world. So that's the first thing. The next thing then they'll look at is probably a property solution. And again, every business needs a home. So they need an office, or they need a warehouse, or they need a production facility, or they need a greenfield site to build a factory. So they're probably the top two things that they're looking at. And then I suppose it's ease of doing business. It's the market logistics. How do we get our product to market? How do we get it out to Europe and around the world from Ireland? Is that easy to do? And obviously we've got so many examples of that around the country where that is, of course, easy to do. And then the technology companies, a lot of them are looking at data hosting here. Financial services companies are looking at the regulatory environment from the central bank. Again, the pharma companies are looking at how the experience is from production of medicines, and equally the same with the medtech folks who are making everything from stents to hips to knees to see how that regulatory environment and how safe it is to produce product here. So there's a huge myriad of pieces to the jigsaw, and I suppose it's not something that I would have really known about 5 years ago when I was in legal, because I was on one side of the house, whereas now I suppose having worked in the regional development office for 5 years, you see the holistic view, and we've kind of got a helicopter view of all sectors, which is very interesting. So you find yourself, one day you could be getting a tour of a biopharma plant, and the next day you could be on a green field with folks in from the States looking to build a new factory. The next day you could be talking about skills in financial services and how companies are going to build their team. So it's hugely diverse, the workload, and I suppose hugely rewarding then, because when you see a company setting up and maybe you have the ribbon cutting on a building, so you might see that on the 9 o'clock news, but there could be 2, 3, 5 years of work gone into that by the team in IDA and with various other different stakeholders. So it's hugely rewarding from that point of view.
There's obviously two huge things going on in the background at the moment, one being Brexit and one being the COVID pandemic. Just in regards to Brexit, how did you plan for that, and how will it actually affect the IDA and investment into Ireland? And what's the plan for the future with Brexit kind of been delayed and stuttering, and now it's actually happening?
Yeah, I suppose, look, Brexit was a bit of a shock to everyone at the time, and probably still is to most people as to how they would, go about their business that way. And that's fine, and that's their business, that's the democratic process, and that's how it works. So from our point of view, I suppose, how did that affect us? In the main, you could be curt and say that it didn't really affect us, in that we do our business as usual and we still try and attract foreign direct investment in. But I suppose from a practical point of view, we would have beefed up our team in our London office at the time, and we would definitely have put a huge focus on financial services and other sectors, but financial services in particular, because the City of London would have had a huge amount of companies who have to have an operation in Europe. So when they were looking at different places, obviously Paris was making quite a good play. The La Défense side of Paris and the city of Frankfurt made a huge play as well. So Dublin was right up there in the mix, and Ireland. And I suppose that from our point of view, with any company, the first thing to do is to attract them and sell them Ireland. And the second thing that we have as a mission critical in IDA is to attract them to a regional location outside of Dublin. So we're always trying to get them to look, be it any company, at bases outside of Dublin. Now that can be hard, because if you have a company coming from a city with 10 million people, are they going to look at a city that's not, in their eyes, a city of scale of international standards? So we're constantly trying to, I suppose, show the virtues of being in a regional location. And then I suppose when we get them to look at that, we can convince them that and showcase other operations that are here for 10, 20, 30 years, who have a very good retention of staff piece, where staff aren't jumping ship, for example, for €1,000 jumping next door. So from a Brexit point of view, we've been very, very busy, but it's still in the main, it's business as usual. You still have to sell them the location. You still have to showcase the talent. You still have to show that they can have a lovely office. You still have to show that they can build a team and grow the functions and do the job that they want to do here. So that's very much business as usual. And obviously, then we can now say that we're the only English-speaking country in Europe, and that's a huge advantage for companies coming in here.
And how have you been able to pivot, or how have you been able to cope since the COVID, since the start of the year? I could see, have you been working from home? Have you all just gone remote, or how has that affected your day-to-day business?
Yeah, so we would have went fully remote in March, back in March this year, and we haven't been back to the office since. And I suppose for an organisation that prides itself on building relationships face-to-face, and that's a huge part of what we do, it was a bit of a shock to the system. So we have, obviously our traditional manner of building relationships is convincing companies to come in on what we call a site visit, where they would come in and visit, and we would put an itinerary in place for a couple of days, or 3-4 days, and they would go around to the various locations that they have picked out that would be suitable possibly for them to set up, and we would showcase the location. We would bring them to meet different companies, different third level institutions, and we would do that. I would drive them around in my own personal car, or we have a minibus if there was enough of them, and showcase the location. So we would really have, I suppose, what we call custody and control of them from the time they touch down in Dublin Airport or Cork or Shannon until the time we drop them back to the airport. That's fundamentally changed now, so we've had to go online. That has its challenges, but I suppose we've risen to the challenge as an organisation to go online, and we're now doing itineraries, with China and the US West Coast at all hours of the day and night, to ensure business continuity from our point of view, but also to continue to showcase Ireland for investment. So back a couple of months ago, I had the very odd scenario of having investors on from Auckland in New Zealand and San Francisco at the one time. So we did our meeting schedule was from 8 o'clock in the evening to 10:30, so as we could cover all time zones. But then I suppose and that's our day to day, and that's absolutely no issue for us. And we never shirk from the point of view of put those out there to do our job as an agency. But what we did have to do then was ask some of our clients to come online at maybe 10 o'clock at night after they've done their long day in the office, and help us sell Ireland or help us sell the location. So we've had to, I suppose, pivot from that perspective. We predominantly use Microsoft Teams now, or I suppose any of the other links that our companies. Some companies have a preference and will only use one particular platform, which is fine as well. We've been able to pivot to that, but I suppose the sooner we can get people physically into Ireland again, obviously that will make our job slightly easier. But that's not to say we're not still pushing that from the point of view of video. And we had our first company into Limerick actually a couple of months ago, who set up completely remotely without having physically visited Ireland, and that was the first one. So hopefully there'll be more of that to come as well.
Brendan, listen, thank you so much for your time. It's been a really interesting story to hear your journey from Blackhall to solicitor in-house into the IDA. What's the plans for you personally? Where do you see yourself going the next 5 to 10 years in the IDA?
Oh, I'd always say to the top, but our CEO Martin Shannon mightn't like that. I know. IDA. The great thing about working with IDA is that it's very progressive from the point of view of people development.
Yeah.
And we are very much encouraged, and I encourage my team in turn to continue professional development and continue learning. So, every year we have tuition aid where we can identify courses that would be of benefit to our own, I suppose, development. So one that I've identified myself, hopefully that I will get sanctioned for, is a course in sustainable development, which is obviously so important from all our companies' point of view, from the point of reduction of energy and reduction of various different pieces of the green environment, and to help that kind of agenda and to push that forward, because that is a huge piece for all our companies now. And I think multinationals in particular have embraced sustainability and the rationale behind it and the science behind it. So everyone's fully aware of that. So I'll hopefully do that. From the point of view of, I suppose, myself internally, I would hope to be able to build and grow my knowledge of the business and of the various different sectors, and that's always very, very interesting. There may be a possibility to go overseas at some point in the future, and I'd very much be looking into that, but not for the now.
So there's a lot of solicitors and young solicitors and people starting out in their law journey watch this, and what would you say to anyone starting out on their journey to become a solicitor now? And also, what would you say to yourself, your younger self back then when you were about to sit the FE1s? What advice would you have given that person?
Oh God, back at the FE1s, study harder and get the other two that I missed out on. That would be the first thing. But I know, joking aside, I think you have to be strategic in what you're doing. So from the point of view of where you want to go, I think you can have one vision in mind, and I think life can take you on a certain other journey, not to be afraid to embrace that, because at the end of the day, you can pigeonhole yourself, or you can think you're pigeonholed into one area of law, but there is the possibility to diversify and move into other areas. And I would say, soak in information like a sponge. If you can do CPD courses, do them. If you've time to do an external course, and if somebody is willing to pay for it, brilliant. Yeah. If not, choose the one that you're looking to do that will advance your goals and advance your personal goals and your career goals, and do that and build up your toolkit from that point of view, and your knowledge toolkit as you're going. And don't be afraid of change, because change is good.
Listen, that's great advice. Thank you so much for your time. It's great to see you do so well, Brendan, and we sincerely wish you all the very best for the future.
Thanks a million.